I'm Brittany. This is Aming, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Sometimes we read them, and sometimes we read really sad gay things. And that's about where we are right now in Heaven Official's Blessing, Volume 6. We got through some rough stuff in the last one, and I imagine the fallout, the further development, the wrapping up of is also not going to be extremely happy. So we're in it right now, emotionally speaking. But it's fine cuz it's so well done. At least, it's it's well-written tragedy. So ultimately we're all having a good time. Listen, I don't know, man. I just don't know. All I know is that I am both having the best time and the worst time at the same time. Meanwhile, pardon me. Meanwhile, the wife has vacation this week. The wife is off from work this week. She was very much looking forward to it. She was super excited about it. She has had the worst week so far. And at this point, she is in a very, this may as well happen type of mood. She's kind of taking it on the chin. If I fought God right now, I would win. So, send the wife some love, because this woman never gets a vacation, and then she gets one, and it is so far bullshit. So, I will, if you send some love to her in the chat, I will let her know. If you're a patron on the Discord, at her, send her some love, send her some nice gifts or something, because damn, just damn. So, we read for about 2 hours. We're starting late today because of one of the things that is making my wife's life difficult right now. So we're starting a little bit late, but we will read for about 2 hours. We aim for 40 to 50 pages, and we almost always get there in some capacity or another. We are on page 261, chapter 101, which is called "With Neither Grief Nor Joy, White Cloth Brings Calamity to This World," which is still percolating. I had a theory I talked about at the end of the last session that still strikes me as a possibility. I have an asthmatic cough. It's not a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. It's not really a big deal. It's just more annoying than anything else. I try to mitigate it. Sometimes it flares up, sometimes it doesn't. It usually tapers off as the session goes. But just bear with me on that one. So, here we are. Hualian couldn't tell if he was awake or asleep, and I feel like that's reminiscent enough of not knowing whether to laugh or cry that we should all do a shot anyway. That feels close enough spiritually. It's a spiritual successor. If he was awake, then he was reacting to nothing in the outside world and had no memory of anything. If he was asleep, his eyes had been open the whole time. By the time he came back to himself, White No-Face had strapped the black sword to his waist like an elder giving a reward to a child. "This is my gift to you." He patted the hilt. His voice was gentle and thick with deeper meaning. "It will certainly prove much sharper than any of the others you collected, even the ones from Junwu." Hualian let him hang the sword as he willed, neither speaking nor retaliating. Retaliation would be pointless. He put on a new set of robes in that state. Armed with a new sword, he dragged himself outside in what felt like a newly born body. He walked out of the temple of the Crown Prince and toward the darkness. White No-Face called after him, "Wait." Hualian paused in his step. White No-Face soundlessly came to his side and placed a white silk band in his hands. You forgot this. It was the silk band he had once used to cover his face, the one that had also been used to bind him. Hualian wobbled down the mountain alone. Day had already broken. The sun had come out, but Hualian didn't feel warm at all when it shined on him. On his way down the mountain, he saw a little trickling stream, clear and lively. He approached the stream's banks. The water reflected his appearance. Hualian stared at his pale face. The face was smooth and fair, without a single cut to be seen. The neck was the same, which meant the chest and the abdomen and other places were all healed. He only looked for a while before he couldn't bear the sight any longer. Lowering his head, he cupped some stream water in his hands to wash his face and drink a few mouthfuls. He drank and drank until he happened to notice something nearby. Slowly, he looked up. Not far upstream, there was a corpse lying on the shore, slumped next to a giant boulder. Judging by the clothes, it was the corpse of the buff street performer. The man hadn't descended the mountain. He'd died on the road. There was a particularly obvious blood stain on the giant boulder. Whether from pain or fear, it looked like he had smashed himself against it until he died. The corpse was already rotten and emitted a foul stench. Half of the body was soaking in the water of the stream. Although the body didn't move, the little deformed faces growing on its half-rotten face were still squirming. Ooh. Hualian knelt by the stream and puked his guts out for over an hour, heaving until blood came up. There it is. There it is. Uh-huh. After descending the mountain, he walked through the city for a long time, aimlessly wandering the main streets without a destination in mind. Suddenly, a hand gripped his shoulder and yanked him into an alley. Hualian looked around and saw an incoming fist before he even glimpsed the other's face. "Where did you run off to for so long?" Behind the fist was Feng Xin's furious expression, but by the time Hualian saw, he'd already been knocked to the ground by the punch. Feng Xin hadn't expected to knock him down so easily. Confused, he looked at his own fist, then at Hualian on the ground. Before he could think to help him up, Hualian had already crawled back up by himself. Feng Xin's face changed, but in the end his temper was still flaring. "You got such an attitude, dropping only a word before running away and disappearing for 2 months? Do you know how worried their majesties have been?" Hualian wiped away the splattered blood on his face from his nosebleed. "I'm sorry." Seeing that he was making things worse by wiping, Feng Xin heaved a heavy sigh. "Your Highness, forget it with the apology. There's no need between us. But what happened to you? Why were you gone for so long? Can't you tell me?" He noticed the black sword hanging at Hualian's waist. "And where did you get that sword?" Hualian wanted to tell him, but then he remembered the argument he'd had with Feng Xin before he left, and the doubtful expression on Feng Xin's face, and that brought to mind the experience he never wanted to think about again. So he just repeated, "I'm sorry." The two returned to the hideout, and when the queen saw Hualian, she hugged him and wept. The king looked like he'd aged quite a bit again. Before, it was a matter of finding white hair among the black, and now it was a search for black strands among all the white. However, he wasn't blowing his top for some reason, and he only spoke a few words before falling silent. The three of them were probably afraid that Hualian would run away for another 2 months if he was provoked again, so they were very careful with their words and gestures around him. That's a scene break. We're at the top of 264. Ooh. Feng Xin. After a meal so simple it was crude, Hualian untied the black sword on his waist and passed it over. "Take this sword, pawn it." Feng Xin noticed that the hand holding the sword was shaking, but he couldn't guess what was causing it. "Why? Didn't you ask for money before?" Hualian said. A flash of hurt suddenly crossed Feng Xin's face, and he shook his head soon after. "I don't need it anymore." Hualian didn't speak another word. He tossed the black sword to the side and stopped caring about it. Then he flopped over and fell asleep. When Lian came back this time, he tried to act like nothing had happened in the hope that everything would return to normal as soon as possible, in the hope that he could return to the person that he once was. Soon, he and Feng Xin went out to perform in the street. Feng Xin was still worried at first and told him, "Forget it, just rest for a couple more days." "I've already rested for almost 2 months, Lian said. "If those street performers keep coming to cause trouble, it'll be easier to handle it with 2 people. "They stopped coming a while ago," Feng Xin explained. It wasn't because the buff street performer had died and there was no one to lead, but because Feng Xin had been settled here for a while now. When he first arrived, everyone had regarded him as a novelty, but that novelty had worn away with the passage of time, and watching him was now no different from watching the other local buskers. Feng Xin had lost his competitive edge, and the other street performers stopped looking for trouble now that he wasn't a threat. Since everyone made about the same amount of money, it was fine. But now, no matter how hard Feng Xin shot his arrows, no matter how expert his skill, the audience and the reward they paid for his efforts was less than half of what it once was. In fact, it was less than 10%. After working for over half the day, Feng Xin was exhausted and sweating profusely as he sat down on the roadside. "Let me go up," Lian said. "No, don't worry about it," Feng Xin replied. However, Lian didn't bother listening to him. The passers-by became interested again at the sight of a new face. "And what special skills do you have, lad?" Lian didn't respond. He picked up a branch and started to perform a swordplay routine. Though he wielded a mere branch, the technique was beautifully performed, and the sound of wind being cut carried the sharpness of the sword's intent. A few audience members did him the honor and cheered. Feng Xin looked on from one side, his expression complicated. He only watched for a bit before he turned his gaze away. Lian didn't feel shame at all, nor did he feel any burden. He just kept deliberately and gracefully swinging his branch. Suddenly, someone in the crowd began to jeer. "It's so boring. What a pathetic act. Who wants to watch you fucking poking around blindly with a tree branch?" Feng Xin immediately jumped to his feet and shouted, "You watch your language!" Lian faltered and looked over. There was a man in the crowd who was munching on a melon and spitting out seeds. He was obviously there to watch the show. "This ancestor's here to watch a street performance. I'll say whatever I want to say. You're here to earn our reward, so what do you care what I say?" The men yelled back at Feng Xin. "Switch to a real sword. Use a real one, and Granddaddy will consider granting you some seeds." As soon as he started yelling, others in the audience followed suit. Feng Xin was furious and just about to strike out when a white shadow flashed past. Lian was already standing next to the heckler. He grabbed the man and threw him high into the air. The strength he exhibited was incredible, and the heckler's melon rinds tumbled to the ground as he was thrown meters away. The crowd was left to gape in open-mouthed shock. The man landed with a heavy thud, bleeding from his orifices and screaming horribly. However, Lian wasn't done, and he went over to seize the man once again. His voice was flat and emotionless. "There are no real swords here, but I can really take your life. Do you want to see that act?" See, this is why you maybe don't fuck with people. Maybe don't fuck with strangers. You have no idea what they have either been through or what has just happened to them. This is possibly why one of the reasons why you don't treat people like shit. The audience broke away and fled in terror. "Somebody help! Murder!" Feng Xin was even more shocked. "Your Highness!" Lian ignored him and prepared to throw the heckler another several meters away and let him fall wherever. But Feng Xin hurried over and held Lian down, even forgetting to hide his identity as he roared, "Your Highness, snap out of it! You're going to kill him!" Lian's eyes were burning with black flames. He smacked Feng Xin's hand away and pressed the man to the ground. The heckler passed out cold. Feng Xin bent down and was just about to check whether he was breathing when he heard someone yelling sharply at the end of the street, "It's them over there!" Oh no. The Yong'an soldiers had come. Feng Xin bolted instantly, but Lian still stood there staring at the Yong'an soldiers like he was contemplating starting a fight with them. Feng Xin turned around and pulled him away. What are you still standing there for? Run! The two of them ducked and hid under cover until they could make an escape and return to their little safe house. The moment they passed through the door, Feng Xin started yelling right in front of the queen. Why would you do something like that? Once, Feng Xin would have never dared to be so unruly before the two majesties. But a lot had changed. They had all been ground down for so long. Hualian turned to the queen. Go to your room. My son, what? The queen started. Go to your room, Hualian shouted. The queen didn't dare press further and retreated to her room. Hualian turned to Feng Xin. What did I do? You were going to kill that man, Feng Xin said angrily. He didn't die, Hualian countered, and so what if he had? Feng Xin was dumbfounded. What did you say? What do you mean, so what if he died? That filthy peasant was asking for it, Hualian said. And since he asked for it, I gave it to him. Was I wrong? Stunned by Hualian's new vocabulary, it was a good moment before Feng Xin said, He was causing trouble, but you didn't need to kill him. Smack him around and let it go. He didn't deserve to die over some petty words. Hualian cut him off. Of course he did. He dared to say it, so he had to pay the price. How could you say something like that? Feng Xin asked, voice thick with disbelief. Like what? Hualian asked. I've never heard you call someone a peasant like that before, Feng Xin said. What are you trying to say? Hualian said. It's not like I'm a god. Can't I be angry? Can't I hate? Feng Xin didn't know how to respond. A moment later, he arduously squeezed out a few words. That's not what I meant, but still, you didn't need to. Hualian didn't want to listen anymore and stopped talking to him. He stomped into his own room and slammed the door. The moment the door was shut, he screamed and threw himself onto the bed. He was fooling himself, utterly fooling himself. No matter what, it was impossible to pretend nothing had happened. It was impossible for him to return to who he once was. Anyone who has experienced or been close to someone who has experienced a severe trauma, there's one particular type of trauma that comes to mind, will know just how viscerally accurate this is. That evening, someone knocked on his door. Hualian assumed it was Feng Xin, so he ignored it. The queen's voice sounded from the other side a moment later. My son, it's your mother. Let mother come in and take a look at you, all right? Hualian had just wanted to lie there without moving, but after staying there for one more moment, he still got up and opened the door. What? He asked tiredly. The queen stood at the door holding a plate. My son, you haven't eaten yet, have you? Hualian stared at her and endured the urge to speak for a long time before he finally, forcefully swallowed the words that were rolling up his throat. Even though I haven't eaten, I don't want to eat anything you made. He moved aside to allow his mother into his room, and the queen placed the plate on the table. Look. Hualian looked, and he got so angry he wanted to laugh. What is that? The queen spoke as if she were offering him treasure. This is lovebirds upon a branch meatballs, and this is blooming flowers and full moon stew. The lovebirds looked like they were dead, and the full moon was full of craters. Hualian had to interrupt her. Why did you name these things? Don't dishes always have names? The queen said. That's for imperial dining in a palace, Hualian said. Ordinary people don't give names to dishes. Imperial dining. Palace. Ordinary people. The queen remained quiet for a while, then smiled. Well, no one ever said you have to dine imperially to give a dish a name. So just take this as a wish for good fortune. Come, try some. Mother spent a long time making this for you. And then she passed a pair of chopsticks over. Hualian didn't smile, nor did he touch the chopsticks. The The queen sat there smiling for a while before her face gradually fell. My son. Lian's tone was brusque. What? Why are you fighting with Feng Xin again? The queen asked. Lian didn't want to explain, and he didn't have the energy to do so regardless. You two just stay in your room and relax. You don't need to worry about these things. The queen hesitated for a moment. Mother knows she probably shouldn't say this, but that child, Feng Xin, was the one who looked after us during the many days that you were gone. Mother, what are you trying to say? Lian demanded. My son, don't be angry. I'm not trying to blame you, the queen said quickly. I'm really not. I know you're having a difficult time as well. I'm only saying that young Feng Xin has always followed us, followed you, and it isn't easy for him. I can sense that he stayed with us until now, not because he didn't want to leave, but because he still cares about your friendship. Lian leapt to his feet. Who has had it easy? Has it been easy for me? Mother, can you please stop asking questions? Can you please not involve yourself in things that you don't understand? When she saw that he was running out the door, the queen started panicking and got up to chase after him. My son, where are you going? I'll stop talking. Mother won't say anything else. Come back. I know, Lian exclaimed sharply. Everyone's having a hard time, but don't worry. I'll go right now and make things easier for everyone. The queen couldn't keep up with him, and it wasn't long before she was left behind. Lian returned later that night carrying a few sacks. When he opened the door, no one had gone to bed. They were all waiting for him, their expressions sullen. Lian shut the door with a backhanded push. What's up? It seemed that the king had already lectured the queen, and the rim of her eyes were red. When she saw that Lian had returned, she let out a long sigh of relief and forced a happy smile. My son, you've come back. I won't ask you any unnecessary questions from now on. Just don't leave us so suddenly. Mother will definitely listen to you if there's anything. Everyone was scared. Scared that if he turned around and left again, he'd go missing for another 2 months. You all think too much, Lian said. I wasn't going to leave. Just go and rest. Feng Xin waited until the king and the queen had gone to their room. After a moment of silence, he began to speak. Even if I asked where you went, you wouldn't tell me, right? Lian didn't reply, just tossed the sacks to the ground. They made crisp, clinking sounds as they landed. What's this? Feng Xin asked. Well, Lian has no problem robbing people anymore. Lian opened the sacks and dumped them out. From within tumbled a large pile of shining gold and silver wares that nearly brightened the entire house. Feng Xin instantly stood up. Where did these things come from? Lian didn't bother to look up as he replied, just sat on the ground and counted the haul. There's no need to be like that. I paid a visit to a big household in the city. Relax, no one saw me. Feng Xin's eyes were round and bulging. Round and bulging. Remembering just then that the king and queen were in the next room, he lowered his voice. You stole them? You don't need to look at me like that, Lian said. Everyone's having a hard time. This will make things easier. You still shouldn't have stolen them, Feng Xin exclaimed. We can just busk. And how much do we earn from killing ourselves performing on the streets? Lian said. Feng Xin staggered back a couple of steps. It was the first time Lian saw him look like he was about to faint. He finally steadied himself and took a moment to make sure he hadn't heard wrong. Then he mumbled, What made you this way? Lian looked up. What way? Feng Xin was furious. I don't want to lecture you, but just look at yourself, at what you've become. I've already stopped asking about the robbery, so how did things get even worse? Lian snorted. I knew it. Knew what? Feng Xin asked. Lian rose to his feet. I knew that robbery thing was still on your mind. You wanted to ask me, but you didn't have the heart. You thought about it 1,000 times, right? Don't obsess about it anymore. I'll tell you. Step by step, he closed in on Feng Xin. It's true. I robbed someone. Feng Xin was forced back a step. Then he advanced a step and hissed in anger. We've been passing our days in such hardship, and for what? If you were willing to do those things, then we could have done them already. Why suffer until today? What are you doing, throwing away all your efforts? Are you still the same royal highness I used to know? Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Oh, fuck me. Oh, wow. that brings up a whole lot of things. Because, like, I definitely have a part of my brain that wants to think that way, that wants to be like, well, if we're in this situation and we're going to be pushed to the point of such desperation as we're going to start robbing people anyway, we may as well avoid the rock bottom and just start robbing people now. Like, there's a part of my brain that wants to think that way sometimes. And so I very much understand where that impulse comes from. But that just brings up a whole litany of questions about whether how you hold on to ideals in terms of great strife and desperation, whether or not you hold on to them, how long you hold on to them, if there's like a point to hold on to them at all of that stuff. This brings up so many things. And that's one of the things about MXTX, is that she does this. She touches on and brings up so many things that has such a heavy debate around them, that like this is, her stuff is always killer for like book clubs or reading groups or something, because it inspires such discussion on so many different things, just so many different things, and it presents them in such amazing ways, like that are emotional but like objective at the same time, and you understand why everything is happening the way it is, so you are already given such great material with which to like spark these debates. It's one of the things that I really don't understand. I don't know how she does it so much, so often. Some writers can do that with maybe like the core message of their entire book, and that's fantastic. She does it with so many different scenarios and contexts throughout her work that it's truly stunning. You're right. Why have we suffered until today? Shilian said. Feng Xin was taken aback, and Shilian continued, what was I like in the past? I didn't talk back when I was cursed at, didn't fight back when I was beaten, and always overestimated myself. I was so determined to save the common people. What kind of person does all that? A dumbass. Do you think being a dumbass is better? Do you think that's the kind of person I should be? Are you going to be very shocked if I'm not? Feng Xin was stunned. Are you crazy? Why do you have to say it like that? You're wrong. I'm not crazy, Shilian said. I've just suddenly come to my senses. Now I know that the past me was the crazy one. Why are you being like this? When did you become this way? Feng Xin mumbled. I really don't know. Why did I follow you all this time? Then stop following, Shilian said. Feng Xin couldn't wrap his head around that one. What? I said, don't follow me anymore, Shilian repeated. Then he slammed the door. Yeah. This also reminds me, and this is why her work can be a Rorschach test a lot of the time, this immediately reminds me of what, at least in America, we're having some debates on right now about pacifism and how effective it really can be, and the ways in which pacifism is so easily taken advantage of by, for lack of a better word, evil people. Like how turn the other cheek will just get you smacked on the other cheek, right? We're having some debates about that these days because it's being so readily taken advantage of constantly by not great people. It's like, maybe there is something to defending yourself and standing up for yourself in certain circumstances, rather than just constantly and always being passive. And so this is deeply interesting to me and very relevant. 4 hours later, there was finally some rustling outside the room and low voices speaking. It seemed Feng Xin was bidding farewell to Xilian's mother and father. Feng Xin's voice was extremely low, the queen's voice was choked with sobs, and the king didn't say much, but there was a lot of coughing. The door opened a moment later, then closed. Feng Xin's voice vanished, and the sound of his footsteps grew more and more distant. Feng Xin had left. Is this going to be what does it? That might be what does it. This whole thing has been incredibly fucking sad. And of all things, that might be what does it. Xilian was still shut in his room, emotionless and expressionless. A moment later, he closed his eyes. He'd finally left. Ever since Mu Qing left them, Xilian had been terrified of this possibility, that one day Feng Xin would leave too. But he'd become so scared of it that he could no longer endure the torment. Rather than dragging it out, slowly grinding away all the kindness and friendship like sharpening a knife until nothing remained, until they loathed the sight of each other, it was better to make it explode now. Before Feng Xin left, Xilian had been afraid. Now that Feng Xin was gone, he wasn't scared anymore. But even though he no longer felt fear, he felt a deeper agony. Xilian had initially held a 1 in a million bit of hope at the bottom of his heart. He'd hoped that Feng Xin would still stay, even if Xilian admitted that he had done things he shouldn't have, even if he became the worst version of himself. Oh. Ouch. After all, the two had never left each other's side since he turned 14 and Feng Xin was selected to be his personal attendant. They were master and servant, but more than that, they were friends, and Feng Xin had no one to care for aside from the crown prince either, or at most him and the king and queen. But Feng Xin had really left. Xilian had already guessed it would end like this, and he could understand it completely. He just couldn't bear it for the moment. Just then the queen's voice came from outside his silent room. "My son, I'm so sorry." This is complicated. 'Cause, you almost can't really blame people for leaving when you push them away that hard. And you also don't know, what's going on in their heads as they're finally leaving. Or what really made it. Or what really made them leave. Was it you literally saying, "Fucking leave"? Or was it Xilian imagines, and Feng Xin was so deeply disappointed that that's what made him leave? This is complicated as shit. Xilian couldn't immediately think of a response. He crawled out of his bed and opened the door, then went out. "It's got nothing to do with you," he said tiredly. Also, there's a lot to be said for having that worst suspicion about yourself confirmed. That oh well, if you had a bad day or you were the worst version of yourself, and if people saw your ugliness, then no one would love you. That's a very common feeling. And even though you told the person to leave, explicitly, them leaving will still confirm that for you, and that doesn't do great things for your psyche. She said, with no personal experience whatsoever. Although I never actually told people to leave. That's true. The king and queen were both sitting at the old creaky table. "Father and mother dragged you down and made you do bad things for our sake. We even made you and Feng Xin argue," the queen said. Xilian forced a smile. "What bad things? Aren't tales and legends full of stories about stealing from the rich to help the poor?" I mean, I very much agree with that, but the context being what it is makes it more complicated. Since Feng Xin's gone, he's gone. This is good, actually. With him gone, things will be more relaxed. Relaxed on both sides. You two just focus on healing. Tomorrow we can buy the best medicine. However, the king glared at him. I won't use that money. The queen tugged at him covertly. Then what do you want? Shilian demanded. The king coughed a few more times. You, go chase after Feng Xin and bring him back. I don't want this money. Then you're gonna fucking die. Then you're gonna die. I mean, this is deeply an unsatisfactory bitch of a situation. But, yeah. Yeah. You hold on to that pride. You see how that goes. You see it. Mm-hmm. Can you eat pride? I'm just asking for a friend. Although the queen was still tugging at him, she agreed. Yes, why don't you chase after Feng Xin? He's your most loyal servant and your best friend. The loyal servant is no more, Shilian said. We have money, so just use it. Don't ask about anything else. I already told you, you don't understand these things. After a long silence, the queen said, I'm so sorry, my son. Mom and Dad can see that you've been struggling very hard on your own. But we're only mortals, so we can't help you at all. You have to take care of us on top of everything else. Shilian was out of energy to say more, so he placated them with empty words of comfort before sending them back to their room. To try to clear his mind, Shilian unwrapped his white silk band and stripped off all his clothes, and then took a quick bath before passing out in bed. He slept so deeply that when he woke the next day, he wondered blearily, how come Feng Xin didn't wake me? It took some time before he remembered that Feng Xin had left. Shilian flipped over and sat up, falling into a daze. But there was something else. Even if Feng Xin had left, what about his parents? Why hadn't his father and mother come to rouse him either? Normally, he would have heard the king coughing by now. That sound had never ceased. So why was it so quiet today? Shilian suddenly felt uneasy. He put on his clothes and got out of bed, then reached for his silk band. But it was missing. He pushed open the door to the room next to his. Mother, have you seen my... The moment he opened the door, his pupils instantly shrank to 2 minuscule dots. He had found his white silk band. The silk band was hanging from the beam. 2 unmoving figures dangled from it. Their bodies had long since gone stiff. They were the bodies of his father and mother. Shilian wondered if perhaps he was still dreaming. He staggered, reaching out to support himself on the wall, but he was swaying so badly that he couldn't catch himself and slipped down along the wall instead. He sat on the ground, hands covering his face. He couldn't breathe. He choked on air. He cried and laughed and cried. Hold, please. that might be one of the meanest things she's ever done. He rambled incoherently to no one. Then he added, "It wasn't, no, wait, you can't, In the end, he couldn't even form a complete sentence. He turned around and screamed, smashing his head against the wall over and over. He should have known. His father was such a conservative, traditional king, and his mother couldn't bear the sight of her loved one suffering, let alone suffering for her sake. They were both nobility, raised in prestige. It was already a miracle that they'd hung on for this long. Hualian smacked his head against the wall hundreds of times. Feng Xin, my father and mother are gone, he mumbled. No one was listening. Only then did he realize he needed to get his parents' corpses down. Oh. Sorry, that tapped something personal for me right then. Finding where I am. After he lowered them, Hualian acted like he had nothing left to do and walked around the house. He saw that there were a few plates of horrid-looking food on the table, long gone cold. They were the dishes that Hualian had made the queen take away the night before without eating a single bite. Now he pulled them over absent-mindedly and ate everything, not daring to leave behind a single leaf, afraid to miss a single grain of rice. After he ate, he heaved and began to vomit. Yeah. Suddenly, Hualian grabbed the white silk band and threw it over the beam, then put his own neck through its knotted loop. Waves of suffocation assaulted him, yet his mind remained clear. Even when his eyes filled with blood, even when his collarbones cracked, he still remained conscious. As he hung there, the white silk band abruptly loosened on its own. Hualian fell heavily to the ground, and in the midst of his dizziness, he saw that the silk band had actually started moving by itself, with no breeze to aid it. It was coiling like a venomous snake. It had conceived its own spirit. It had been dyed with Hualian's blood, had hung 2 royals to death. If Hualian could die, then it would have been 3. Saturated with such deep resentment and evil, it would be stranger if it didn't turn into a spirit. The little spirit had only just arrived in the world and didn't understand at all that it had been born from such despair. It happily drifted over to the one who had given it a soul, like it was hoping for a gesture of affection. Did we need art? I think even if I wanted to show this art, I don't think I could, actually. Even if I wanted to. I don't think YouTube would let me. Sorry, I was mid-sentence. Like it was hoping for a gesture of affection. However, Shilian had no eyes for it, and he clutched his head and roared, "Somebody! Somebody come kill me." He could only pray that someone would come right that second to take his life and help him break free from this endless pain and torture. Just then, in the far distance, he heard the roaring sounds of gongs and drums. Shilian panted harshly, his eyes bloodshot. What is that? He wondered. Something drove him to his feet, and he stumbled outside to look. He walked for a long time before he finally realized that it was the sounds of celebration. They were commemorating the imperial palace's construction in the newly established royal capital of the newly established kingdom of Yang'an. The entire nation had joined in jubilation. All the former citizens of Shanlei were now cheering for Yang'an. On the main street, everyone's faces bore bright smiles. It was such a familiar sight. Shilian remembered now. This was how the people of Shanlei's imperial capital had cheered during the Shangyuan heavenly ceremonial procession. Shilian staggered back to the cottage and sat listlessly on the floor. Why did he have to witness the laughter and cheers of the Yang'an people when the corpses of the king and queen of Shanlei lay at his feet? Shilian buried his face in his hands, crying and laughing. A moment later, he giggled. Don't think it'll be that easy for you. Memories flashed in his mind of a voice telling him, human face disease is resentment. This is how you create human face disease. A savage light glinted in his eyes and his voice softened. I won't let any of you off so easily. Hang on. Disease is resentment. This is how you create human face disease. Is that new information? Resentment. Huh. The expression on his face was like he was both laughing and crying. Like joy and sadness mixed together. Using the wall as support, he slowly rose to his feet. Yang'an, forever peace? The term forever peace has a footnote that says, the name Yang'an means forever peace. Dream on. Keep dreaming forever. I curse all of you. I curse all of you. I want all of you to die. All of you to the last. Shilian laughed and rushed forth like a whirlwind. When he passed the mirror, he suddenly paused and whipped his head around. His reflection had already changed completely. He wasn't wearing his white cultivator robes, which were threadbare from the wash. Instead, he was wearing snow-white funeral robes with expansive sleeves. His face was no longer his own, but a half-crying, half-smiling mask. Shilian would have once screamed in horror at the sight of himself like this. However, the Shilian of today wasn't scared at all. He laughed maniacally and ignored the change. He stumbled to the door, crashing through it before breaking into a dash. It's a scene break. I could use a break from that scene. I hate being right. I hate being right. Didn't I, at a couple of different points, I think correct me if I'm wrong, ultimately, I pretty much predicted Royer, didn't I? I called it. Not so much predicted, it was just one of the many theories I had. I called Royer, didn't I? I think I was like kind of half joking when I did it. But I was like, watch, if Royer is... Yeah. Well, we have that answer about white no face. I still have a very, like, just off in the back of my head, tangential thought about, like, maybe he's somehow, because, you know, unless you have some time travel things to talk about, which is entirely possible, like, he just, like, a white no-face just created another white no-face is a possibility in the back of my mind, as opposed to we have just witnessed the birth of the white no-face, right? But it's probably the what, you know, I should probably just keep reading. We're at the bottom of 280. Yeah, you know, as cliche as hurt people is, it's a cliche for a reason, because it's fucking true. It is pretty much the truth of, like, the entire human race boiled down to 2 words repeated twice. The former imperial capital of Shanlei was now nothing more than a field of ruined wreckage. There were still some who lived near the wreckage, residents who had been lucky enough to survive, and refugees who had nowhere else to go. Ever since the plague of human face disease had erupted and the imperial city had fallen, the once glamorous capital was subject to frequent sinister, chilling winds. By the way, I haven't really been able to keep track of, you know, chat or anything like that. I usually can't. So this is apropos of literally nothing. This is caused by literally nothing. I am just putting out a blanket statement because this is dealing with so much heavy subject matter and so much difficult, challenging, complicated, meaningful subject matter that this is just a general reminder to be civil in your discourse, and reminder that we can have very deep, challenging discussions without getting mean or nasty or anything. I'm sure you guys haven't. I have not seen anything at all. This is not prompted by any comment whatsoever. I just feel that we're really in the thick of it at the moment, and so it warrants a little reminder for my own sanity. The few disheveled beggars who had remained were fleeing, watching the skies as they ran. They sensed that something ominous was approaching and knew better than to linger in the streets. The battlefield sprawled in front of the broken imperial city gates. Not many dared to visit it. Now there was only an old cultivator scurrying around trying to catch some lost, wandering souls. He stuffed them into his sack once they were caught, ready to take them and tie them into lanterns. As he darted around, the old cultivator unexpectedly discovered that a strange, white-clothed figure had appeared at the edge of the battlefield. Truly strange, truly peculiar. The man was wearing white funeral robes with expansive sleeves, and he had a band of white silk tied to one arm. The white silk band floated in the wind like it was alive. On the man's face was a ghastly white mask, half of it crying, half of it smiling. The old cultivator shuddered violently, and before he knew why he was fleeing, his legs had already carried him away from the battlefield. He stopped before the fright had left him completely and looked back. The white-clothed man didn't speak a single word as he strolled across the battlefield. Chilling wind whipped around him, and with every step he trampled the bones of those who had died in the war. Countless souls of the dead were struggling and wailing on this soil. Even the air was black from resentment. "Do you hate?" the white-clothed man asked coldly. The dead souls wailed and cried. The white-clothed man took another few steps. "The people you swore to protect, the people for whom you swore to die, they have now become the people of a new kingdom. Do you hate?" The wails of the dead souls now had shrieking mixed in. They've forgotten those who died on the battlefield, forgotten your sacrifices. They are cheering for the ones who stole your lives away. The white-clothed man said slowly, "Do you hate?" Amidst the shrieking there came howling and snarling. The white-clothed man called out sharply, "What's the use in screaming? Answer me, do you hate?" The battlefield's air began to echo with innumerable voices of resentment and agony. I hate. Kill, I want to kill them." The white-clothed man opened his arms toward them and extended both hands. "Come to my side." He then made this vow, saying the words slowly and clearly, "I promise the people of Yang'an shall never know peace." The shrieking, the howling, the snarling, it shook the ground and crashed the heavens. The souls of the dead had answered him. Fallen Shanlei soldiers mingled with those who had died from human face disease, and in that sky choked by black mist, they took shape. The old cultivator witnessed the whole thing from afar in terror. This is, in an instant, only 3 words appeared in his mind. White-clothed calamity. Suddenly, the white-clothed man heard a young man's voice. "Your Highness." He looked back only to find that a black-clad young man was already standing there. And then the young man bowed his head and bent one knee to the ground. Well, that's the end of the chapter. We've gone full Wei Wuxian at this point. I'm deeply curious about timelines now. Or about what could possibly happen after. I have a lot of fundamental questions, which makes sense considering there's 2 more volumes after this. We're on page 280. I have no idea if I just said this or not. My brain is everywhere and nowhere. We're on page 285. It's chapter 102. White-clothed ghost appoints black warrior as general. Based on his voice and physique, he was determined to be a young man. He was dressed in neat and orderly warrior gear, his physique tall and slender. Like new, fresh bamboo, he had an aura of the innocence of youth. Robes as black as ink, hair as black as ink, tied high. From his waist hung a saber, long and slim. He raised his head slowly, and upon his face there was a snow-white mask painted with a crescent-eyed smile. Ball after ball of black mist took shape amidst all the hissing and wailing, which were all sucked cleanly into the array within the white-clothed man's Chenkun sleeve. It was like he took an entire river into a small jade bottle. As for the young man, he remained steady and still within the chaotic black whirlwind. "Who are you calling?" the white-clothed man asked. The black-clad young man was still down on one knee. The pose was one of servile submission, but also of swearing an oath. "I was calling you, your royal highness." "I'm not your royal highness," the white-clothed man said coldly. "You are," the black-clad young man replied. "I would never forget your voice or your form." The white-clothed man's voice was now laced with anger. "I told you, I'm not him." The white-clothed man was naturally Hualian, who had donned the funeral garb and put on the cry-smiling mask. No one could recognize him with his face hidden behind the mask, and he didn't want to be recognized. And yet, on this battlefield, a wandering black-clad warrior had identified him straight away. Suddenly, the white silk band, wrapped inside Hualian's expansive sleeve, lunged like a viper at the black-clad young man. Although it looked like soft white cloth at first glance, it was savage when it attacked, and its evil chi burst forth. But just as the black-clad young man was about to be wrapped and bound, he reached out and firmly caught the white silk band. One end of the white silk band was wrapped around Hualian's wrist, the other was caught around the wrist of this black-clad young man. The silk band was gradually pulling itself taut. If I remember my Chinese culture accurately, isn't that kind of giving off marriage ceremony vibes? It was trying to break away, but the black-clad young man had a tight hold on it, like he was squeezing a venomous snake at its fatal point. Chilling chi flowed endlessly from his hand. There was no doubt that this was a soul of the dead, and it was an extremely powerful one. Hualian could tell that the strength passing through the white band was not to be underestimated. "What is your name?" He remained silent for a moment. Then the black-clad young man replied, "I do not have a name." Hualian didn't push further. "No name would make you Wu Ming." Footnote: Wu Ming means nameless. "You may call me whatever you desire," Wu Ming said. "Are you a soul of this battlefield's dead?" "I am." Only then did Hualian slacken his attack. The white silk band instantly leapt back to Hualian, swaying at Wu Ming to show off its might from afar, like it was lashing a venomous tongue. If he was a soul who had died in battle, no wonder he had heeded Hualian's call. This black-clad warrior must have also been filled with resentment toward the people of Yong'an. In other words, he could be used because their objective was the same. Thus, Hualian said, "Then follow me." He extended his hand to Wu Ming. "I will give you what you want." Wu Ming's face was also hidden behind a mask, so his expression couldn't be seen. They were indeed the same. After a moment of silence, he grasped Hualian's extended hand with conviction, bowed his head deeply, and pressed his cold forehead to the back of Hualian's fingers. A long moment later, he vowed sincerely, "I swear to die following your highness." Hualian, however, pulled back his hand and tucked his arms into his sleeves. He turned around and said coolly, "You're already dead. Come." Wu Ming rose to his feet, and when Hualian looked back, he discovered that the young man was much bigger than he had expected. He was probably only around 16 or 17 years old, but was enormously tall already. He was even a bit taller than Hualian. That was unimportant, though, and Hualian only took a glance before turning back around and continuing onward. Hualian took the lead, and the nameless black-clad warrior followed right behind as expected. "Your Highness, where do you want to go?" Hualian gazed into the distance. "The Palace of Yong'an." Oh, art. Oh, there's a scene break, so I'll show you the art now. Oh. It's like I don't even really know. I don't know if I have words for very much anymore. I don't know if they're entirely helpful at all. I mean, beautiful art makes me feel a little bit sick. Whew. Oh, wait. I just did not do that correctly. Hang on. Getting my screen the way it usually is. There we go. That was a scene break at the top of page 289. The Palace of Yong'an sat in a large city to the west. It was once a flourishing city in its own right, but it had been overshadowed by the imperial city of Shanlei in the east. Now that Shanlei had fallen, the new king had moved the capital here. It wouldn't be long before it overtook the old imperial city, basking in its newfound glory. Hualian arrived at the new imperial city deep in the night. Beneath the moonlight, he was like a white cat soundlessly flying across the ridges of the densely packed rooftops, and Wu Ming was like a black spirit fox following closely behind. Soon the two shadows landed before a large gate. Hualian sensed something amiss. There was faintly ominous air surrounding the gate, and he paused. He was about to reach out to check it when Wu Ming stepped in front of him. The black-clad man extended an open palm and said quietly, "Break." A line of firelight leaked from around the edges of the door as if something had been burnt away. Only after that did Wu Ming reach out and push the gate open. "Your Highness." Hualian crossed the threshold and looked at the ground. Just as he expected, there were some burnt shreds scattered there. Hualian picked a bit of it up to inspect, and he smelled the scent of herbs and talisman paper. He stole a glance at Wu Ming. This ghost was indeed formidable. These were the burnt remnants of charms, which obviously indicated there was someone on the other side of the door who had woven a defense spell, a strong one. If ordinary little minions tried to intrude or break the array, their innards would have been burnt to ashes, yet it only took this black-clad warrior an instant to destroy it completely. Perhaps because it was newly erected, the Palace of Yong'an wasn't extraordinarily magnificent. It was even a little shabby. It couldn't be compared to the palace of Shanlei. But that wasn't the strange part. The truly strange thing about this building was the massive number of evil warding traps and defense arrays set up throughout the palace. Still, every time Xilian noticed something blocking the way ahead, Wu Ming would immediately step forward and break through the obstacle to clear the path for him. In the end, his journey was entirely unimpeded. An hour later, two tall, slender shadows kept watch from the roof ridge of the palace of Yang'an's large great hall. They both wore masks. The white-clothed man's expansive sleeves fluttered, and the white silk band wrapped around his arm danced madly in the wind. The black-clad man was sleek and agile and wore a long saber at his waist. He kept guard at the white-clothed man's side, gazing in the same direction he did. The scene under the moonlight was somehow at once dangerous, uncanny, and beautifully harmonious. The newly crowned king of Yang'an was inside this great hall. Xilian snorted. He set up so many obstacles in his palace to ward off evil, it seems he's quite scared that something will come knocking, huh? Your Highness, I will open the path, Wu Ming said. However, Xilian stopped him. No need, I'll do it myself. Then he leapt down like a white blossom blown off the tip of a branch by a breeze and landed soundlessly before the palace hall. That is a sentence. That is a sentence. Then he leapt down like a white blossom blown off the tip of a branch by a breeze and landed soundlessly before the palace hall. That is a sentence. Granted, there are quite a few capital S sentences, and if we stopped at all of them, we would be here all day. But this one, 1000% deserved a particular shout out. Just as he was about to push open the gates, he heard a baby's wailing from within. Lang Ying didn't have any consorts, and his son had died a long time ago. Where had this baby come from? Xilian didn't care, though. Never mind a baby, he wouldn't be afraid if an army of millions was hidden inside. He raised his leg and kicked open the palace door. Strangely, there was only one person within the great hall. There was not a single other soul present, and certainly no baby. When the lone person saw who had arrived, he raised his head. You've come? I've been searching for you. The one within the palace was Lang Ying. Although he was now an esteemed king, he wasn't dressed in lavish robes, and he sat woodenly upon the throne. Xilian was puzzled for a moment at his reaction, but then he realized that he was wearing a mask and funeral garb. Lang Ying had taken him for White No-Face. There were arrays set up within the palace hall as well, and when Xilian crossed the threshold, he could sense something blocking him from approaching further. However, it only took putting a little more force into his steps for him to easily walk forward into the hall. The sound of something shattering rang out. Night and the chill of winter came pouring in from outside the palace hall, filling Xilian's sleeves with wild winds. Why were you searching for me? He asked gloomily. When he heard Xilian's voice, Lang Ying's expression changed slightly. It's you? Xilian approached slowly, his snow-white boots advancing across the icy stone floor step by step. It is I. Lang Ying, a brutish commoner, had led an army and destroyed Shanlei. With the kingly aura surrounding his body, ordinary evil couldn't come close to him. However, Xilian had brought with him millions of souls of the battlefield's dead. He refused to believe that Lang Ying would be able to defend himself against so many ghosts that bore him such powerful resentment. The vengeful spirits were agitated and impatient, ready to break free and seize the fresh, new flesh of their enemy as a host. It was impossible for anyone not to have heard their roiling, but Lang Ying didn't look particularly alarmed. You've come to kill me? Xilian didn't answer. In the blink of an eye, he appeared right in front of Lang Ying and grabbed him by the hair, yanking him down and pressing him to the ground. Success! Under the cry-smiling mask, Xilian's lips unconsciously curled upward. He knew it! He knew it! He could now defeat Lang Ying! His heavenly official status had once restricted Xilian and made him powerless before this man with a king's fortune. But now Xilian was stripped of such bondage, had thrown away his godly state, and he could finally defeat Lang Ying. Xilian's heart was pounding, and he was just about to move on to the next step when his face dropped abruptly. What's that sound? He heard a tiny baby's cry again, but there was clearly no baby within the great hall. He listened again. This wasn't right. The crying was coming from Lang Ying, who was currently subdued under his hand, or more accurately, it was coming from somewhere on Lang Ying's body. Shi Lian ripped off Lang Ying's robe, and his eyes widened. He jumped to his feet. What is this? Lang Ying slowly rolled over and sat up. Don't be scared. His words weren't directed at Shi Lian, but to the thing attached to his body. Okay, hang on. What? There were two distinct faces. Growing on Lang Ying's chest like protruding tumors. Each one was about the same size as a normal human's face. The larger face was elegant and beautiful and easily identifiable as a woman. The smaller face was slightly scrunched up like a baby's. The halting cries had been coming from the baby's mouth. Human face disease. Shi Lian was dumbfounded. How did you get infected with human face disease? This isn't human face disease, Lang Ying said. How is it not? Well, what is it then? Shi Lian exclaimed. This is my wife and son, Lang Ying explained. They're not a disease. What? Be gentle with me, Watson. This has been a time. What? His voice was soft as he raised his hands to gently caress the two faces on his body, truly looking like a husband and father, soothing his wife and child. However, the two faces couldn't even open their eyes. They could only open their mouths to cry and sob. They had the shape of humans, but they were not human at all. A moment later, Lang Ying looked up. Where's White No-Face? He said my wife would return if I did this, but it's been so long now. How come she still can't... Sorry, I'm blue screen there for a second. How come she still can't talk? What's going on? Tell him to come find me, quick. Hearing this, Shi Lian understood. You let White No-Face plant the vengeful spirits of your wife and son on your body? So that was it. All the spells and arrays in the palace weren't to impede intruders from outside, but to prevent the escape of the things hiding within. Lang Ying, who had already become king, was using his own flesh and blood to secretly raise these two vengeful spirits. Shi Lian had come to seek vengeance, yet who could have guessed that he wouldn't need to do anything? Lang Ying had already infected himself with human face disease. These two faces must have been on his body for a long time now. They had grown tiny, deformed arms and legs that drooped heavily off him in a disturbing display. Moreover, they had already sucked their host dry. Lang Ying's ribs were abnormally visible. His gut was shrunken in, and his skin was wax yellow. He looked wan and sallow, like he didn't have much longer to live. He was no longer the same brave, fierce warrior he'd been on the battlefield. It seemed he hadn't been living well, despite winning the war and becoming a king, but Shi Lian didn't feel gratified at all, and he seized Lang Ying. What kind of joke is this? He exclaimed angrily. He didn't even get the chance to take his enemy's life. His enemy was about to die on his own. What the hell? What should he do now? Something tumbled off Lang Ying as Shi Lian grabbed him. It shimmered and glinted red as it bounced and rolled away. Lang Ying clutched Shi Lian's hands. Even such a simple gesture seemed quite difficult for him. Pearl. That pearl, he panted. Shi Lian looked over. Rolling on the floor was the red coral pearl he had once given Lang Ying. I've always wanted to say this to you. Thank you for the pearl, Lang Ying said. Hearing this surprised Shi Lian. He never expected Lang Ying to say that so suddenly. Something within his heart was about to be unburied, but he forced it down. Things would have been better if you'd given it to me sooner, though, Lan Ying said softly. Too bad. Before he finished, the body in Xilian's grip slackened. Lan Ying died just like that, his eyes still wide open. Xilian hadn't had the chance to react before Wu Ming said, Your Highness, he's dead. Dead? Xilian wondered. He looked down and Lan Ying's eyes were already going dull. He really had died. How is he just dead? Xilian mumbled. He hadn't done anything to Lan Ying yet. How could he be dead? And now that he thought about it, Lan Ying had died fairly fulfilled and happy. His revenge against Shanlei was complete, and with his family so close at hand, he was prepared to immediately reunite with them in the underworld. He had suffered enough torment in the world of the living, so death was likely a form of release, an end to it. But Xilian was left with nothing to avenge himself upon. His chest was filled with grievance and indignation, and in the end, they coalesced into a single emotion: hate. How despicable, how absolutely despicable. Lan Ying had stopped moving, but the two faces on his chest seemed to know that their host was dead, and suddenly started to cry. The noise was piercing, worse than the sound of nails scratching on gold and silver plates. Xilian was already going mad from fury. He pulled out the black sword, ready to strike, and shut them up when Wu Ming swiftly drew his saber. The saber's light flashed past him, and Lan Ying's corpse was instantly chopped to pieces. Tens of pieces, hundreds of pieces. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Xilian hadn't even moved before he was overtaken. Who told you to do that? He questioned coldly. There was no need to dirty your highness's hands, Wu Ming replied. Why is the name Wu Ming sounding familiar now? Am I making that up? Simple yes or no question. No context, no nothing. Just yes or no. Have we heard the name Wu Ming before? Or am I just making that up? Because there's a lot of names. No? Okay. Alright, just me. Good, thank you. Just then, urgent footsteps sounded outside the door. Uncle! A young boy's voice called. Who? Xilian turned around and saw that the doors of the palace hall were wide open. A boy, 10 or so years old, was standing there and gazing at the scene in front of him. His face had been full of smiles at first, but they turned to shock when he entered and saw the gore covering the floor. Xilian was unmoved. Who are you? The boy started. Then his gaze fell upon the chunks of dead body all around the room. Uncle! More people began calling to him from outside. Your Royal Highness, don't run off. The king said you can't run around in the palace. Please don't make things difficult for me in the middle of the night. Royal Highness? Lan Ying's son was dead, and this boy called him uncle, so he must be the one Lan Ying had named Crown Prince of Yong'an. The reality of the situation seemed to have dawned on the young Crown Prince, and he cried out in horror, Ghosts! There are ghosts! Somebody... He hadn't screamed more than a few words before Wu Ming struck him in the neck. The Crown Prince of Yong'an lost consciousness and fell into the blood pooling on the floor. However, his screams had already reached those outside, and a commotion began to rise. What? Did you hear that? Guards! Guards! Xilian's eyes flicked, and Wu Ming inclined his head, indicating he would take care of it. He flashed away. In an instant, all the noise outside was choked off. Exiting the great hall, Xilian saw many guards strewn about on the ground. Wu Ming stood at the center of the fallen crowd, his thin, delicate saber dripping with blood. He had finished them all with a single strike, because he still insists on being hot about it. More noise came from afar in the distance, and a new batch of guards arrived amidst shouts of "Protect the king!" and "Protect his highness!" Xilian coldly turned around and ignored them completely. Sure enough, less than a second later, those voices vanished completely, cut down like a harvest faced with a scythe. Soon after, Wu Ming silently caught up to him. Xilian inclined his head. Burn the palace? Wu Ming bowed his head. Yes, sir. Roaring flames blazed to the sky. Two tall, slender figures stood before the raging fire. Their shadows on the ground writhed and contorted ceaselessly, pulling and twisting, changing shape. The attendants within the palace of Yong'an were jolted awake by the havoc, and the air was choked by the cries and curses of those putting out the fires and those making their escape. It was very much the same scene as when the palace of Shanlei had been set ablaze. "Your Highness, what do you want to do next?" the black-clad warrior asked. "To Langar Bay," the white-clothed man said in a chilly voice. That's a scene break. We're at the bottom of 297. Before the kingdom of Shanlei fell, Shilian had visited Langar Bay. Going from the to the bay fucks me up sometimes. Langar Bay. It is so frustrating how my mouth does not agree with so much Chinese. Every time he went, it was to create rain to save... Every time he went, it was to create rain to save the people. His body and heart were always exhausted, his steps leaden. This time he was visiting for a completely different reason, and his body was light. Having survived the drought and gained the support of the new king, Langar Bay had been revived, lively and bustling. Streets and alleys were busy and joyful, the people cheerful and happy. It was a complete reversal from the misery of years ago. Only one place was still as miserable as before, and that was the temple of the Crown Prince of Shanlei. No one would come to a broken-down temple of the Crown Prince, so Shilian chose it as his place to rest. Right now, he was meditating within the hall. The vengeful spirits should have quickly found a host in Lang Ying, the target of Shilian's revenge, yet because he was already dead, they still struggled in agony, wailing and screeching relentlessly at Shilian. Frowning, Shilian waved them away with his eyes closed. "Just wait, don't be impatient. I will allow all of you to find release." Just then, a voice called out, "Your Highness?" Shilian opened his eyes. He saw Wu Ming before him, one knee on the ground. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page 299 for chapter 103. Nameless ghost offers a nameless flower. Shilian's mind was still deeply mired in the screaming of the vengeful spirits, and he couldn't quite regain himself for the moment. Shaken, his face was drenched with cold sweat underneath the mask. "Don't address me by that title," he responded, still distracted. Every time someone addressed him like that, it was as if they were trying to remind him of something. It made him particularly irritated, and each instance jolted his heart. However, Wu Ming said, "Your Highness will forever be Your Highness." Shilian looked over. He couldn't see Wu Ming's face, of course, just the smiling mask, and when Wu Ming gazed at him, he also could only see a ghastly white, cry-smiling mask. "If you keep calling me by that title, I'll disperse your soul," Shilian said coldly. "Don't think yourself to be so strong." Wu Ming bowed his head and did not speak. Shilian calmed himself. "Go search the area around Langar Bay and find the best location to set up an array." "Yes, sir," Wu Ming replied. Shilian closed his eyes, paused, and then opened them again. He gazed at the black-clad warrior, frowning. "Why are you still here?" "The location is settled," Wu Ming replied. "What about the time?" "Time? The souls of the dead cannot wait any longer. We must find a subject to curse soon, without delay." They truly couldn't delay for long. After some silence, Shilian said, 3 days. "Why 3 days?" Wu Ming asked. For some reason, Shilian got easily agitated whenever he conversed with Wu Ming. "In 3 days, it will be the full moon. Unleashing the spirits at that time will increase the plague's power significantly. You ask too many questions. Just go." Wu Ming nodded and stood down without another word. Shilian closed his eyes and covered his forehead with his hand, hoping to relieve this round of headaches. Just then he heard a cold, mocking chuckle from behind him. That familiar, mocking laughter froze Shilian's blood solid. He whirled around, and sure enough, behind him sat a snow-white figure in a cry-smiling mask. His hands were tucked inside the expansive sleeves of his funeral garb, and he was watching Shi Lian from the altar. White No-Face. Shi Lian drew his sword and lunged. White No-Face caught the point of the blade between two fingers, sighing as he did. Just as I thought. This appearance suits you very well. Wearing their masks, the two of them looked identical from head to toe. No one but the two men themselves could have differentiated one from the other as they clashed in a whirl of white. White No-Face easily evaded all of Shi Lian's strikes, and as he did, he asked, Your Highness, you buried your parents in such deserted foreign soil. Didn't you think that might wrong their memory? Shi Lian's heart sank. You touched my mother and father's bodies? Did you desecrate their corpses? No, just the opposite, White No-Face said. I helped you give them a proper, solemn burial. Shi Lian was taken aback. I helped you by carrying them to the Shanlei Royal Mausoleum, and I even dressed them in a pair of rare, exquisite robes that will prevent them from rotting for thousands of years, White No-Face added. The next time you visit them, you will still be able to see the same faces you knew from when they were alive. He then told Shi Lian the location of the royal mausoleum and how to enter. This should have been something the king and state preceptor told Shi Lian, but before they were able, they had both either died or disappeared. Shi Lian was stunned and suspicious. Why do you know how to enter the royal mausoleum? White No-Face smiled. I know everything about your highness. You don't know shit, Shi Lian hissed. He still wasn't used to spitting such vulgar words from his lips. As if White No-Face had seen through him, he looked Shi Lian up and down and said gently, Don't worry, it's all right. From now on, there will no longer be anything that can hold you back. There won't be anyone to hold unnecessary expectations of you, and there certainly won't be anyone who knows who you are. You are free to do anything you want. His words planted a strange feeling in Shi Lian. Why had this monster come here today? To express his goodwill. Although the very idea seemed absurd, Shi Lian's instincts told him that it was true. Providing his parents with a proper burial, trying to console him, it all came from this intent. That must mean he was very, very happy. Happier than any other time Shi Lian had met him. It was like he was exceptionally delighted to see Shi Lian like this, and it was making him unconsciously gentler and kinder. That kindness actually made Shi Lian feel a flash of gratitude, one so keen that it might have brought him to tears, but that was drowned out by overwhelming disgust. Don't be so happy so soon, Shi Lian said frostily. I still won't allow a creature like you to remain in the world. Once I've wiped Yang'an from the map, I will come for you. You'd best prepare yourself. White No-Face opened his arms wide and shrugged. I happily welcome you with open arms. Even if you come intending to kill me, I will still be here waiting for you. When you've truly become strong enough to defeat me, you will be able to take up my mantle. Ah! There we go. However, the smile under the mask seemed to fade. Will you actually destroy Yang'an? What do you mean? Shi Lian demanded. You could make your move right now. Why choose to move in 3 days? Are you hesitating now that things have finally come to a head? Could it be that, even with your kingdom destroyed and your family dead, you still don't have the courage to seek revenge? Will I witness another of your highness's failures? The word failure stabbed his ears. Shi Lian raised his sword and lunged, but he was sent to the ground by one kick from White No-Face, and the creature had somehow snatched away the black sword. His gentle tone was now condescending. Do you know how you're acting right now? Shi Lian grabbed the snow-white boot on his chest, but no matter how hard he pushed, it wouldn't move an inch. He remained firmly pinned down by that foot, trapped on the ground. White No-Face leaned down slightly. You're like a skulking child. You don't yet have the resolve. Who says I don't? Shi Lian cried angrily. Then what are you doing right now? White No-Face questioned. Where's your curse? Where are your dead? Your father and mother, your soldiers, your citizens. How truly pitiful that they had such a god thrust upon them. You couldn't protect them while they were alive, and you can't avenge them after their deaths. You useless trash. He put more of his weight onto the foot on Shilian's chest. Trickles of blood began to creep from the edges of Shilian's cry-smiling mask, choked from his lungs. White No-Face lowered the hand that gripped the sword, and its black jade tip prodded against Shilian's throat. As it traced the cursed shackle there, the feeling awakened memories Shilian had pushed down. Would you like me to remind you what it feels like to be pierced by 100 swords? Overwhelming fear made Shilian's breathing hitch. He was too terrified to move. Yeah. After successfully scaring him, White No-Face became amiable again. He withdrew his boot and helped Shilian, who was frozen in terror, to sit upright. White No-Face grasped Shilian's chin and pushed it in a specific direction. Come look. This is what you look like right now. He forced Shilian to view the desecrated divine statue upon the desecrated altar. The flower and sword in the Crown Prince's statue's hands were gone. It had been burnt by blazing fires, hacked by axes, and pelted by vegetables, lifted and smashed to the floor. Half of it was burnt black, and there were limbs missing. It was a tragic sight to behold. Who do you have to thank for becoming like that? White No-Face asked. Do you think it's me? He was trying to forcefully indoctrinate Shilian once again. New ideas were being poured into his mind, filling him with more and more confusion, more and more doubt. He had even forgotten his anger. What do you want? Why do you cling to me? Shilian wondered, his tone distracted. I've told you, White No-Face replied. I've come to guide and educate you. The third thing I will teach you is this. If you cannot save the common people, then destroy them. They will revere you only when you crush them underfoot. Do we lead with love? Do we lead with fear? I wonder which category this approach falls into. When White No-Face said those words, Shilian's head suddenly throbbed like it was going to explode. He clutched at it and screamed. It was the vengeful spirits. There were so many, and they were shrieking and wailing inside his mind. Shilian's head hurt so much that he wanted to roll on the ground. White No-Face, on the other hand, started laughing. They cannot wait any longer, he cooed gently. If you don't unleash the plague of human face disease within 3 days, if you cannot give them a target to curse, then you will become their target. And do you know what will become of you then? Shilian could feel the freezing black sword being stuffed into his hand once again. A voice resounded in his ears. You no longer have the choice to turn back. When the throbbing headache finally faded, Shilian dropped his hands and opened his eyes. Inside the broken-down temple of the Crown Prince Shanlei, he was alone. The white-clothed man who was his exact likeness had long since vanished. He didn't know how much time had passed, but night had fallen. It was dim and shadowed inside the temple of the Crown Prince. Shilian's heart stuttered when he realized something. 1 day of 3 had already passed. A tiny spot of white seemed to glow within the darkness of the hall. It was strange, and Shilian turned to look, but when he got a clear view of what that white spot was, his pupils shrank in shock, though his eyes could not be seen underneath his mask. He snatched up the offending thing and demanded, What is this flower doing here? It was a fresh, delicate little white flower, and it had been placed on the left hand of the scorched, broken divine statue. The contrast between it and the blackened statue made it appear especially pure, like snow, but also especially bleak. It looked like this divine statue had suffered all its injuries to protect the little flower. It's the metaphor. Oh, it's always the metaphor. Hello. There we go. Shilian didn't know why this scene enraged him so keenly. Ghost, come out, he bellowed. Soon the saber-wielding black-clad warrior appeared as expected. He hadn't yet spoken before Shilian demanded, "What's the meaning of this flower? Who did this? Did you do this?" Wu Ming bowed his head slightly, and his gaze paused for a moment on the flower that seemed crushed to suffocation in Shilian's hand. Finally, he said quietly, "It wasn't me." "Then who could have done it?" Shilian exclaimed. "Why is your highness so angry at seeing this flower?" Wu Ming asked. Shilian's face darkened and he threw the flower to the ground. "Pranks like these disgust me." Wu Ming, however, said, "Why would it be a prank? Perhaps your highness has believers here who still offer worship." "Oh, we have art, and because they still have the masks on, it's creepy art." His words were like a slap to Shilian's face, and he turned to Wu Ming. "Are you making fun of me?" "No," Wu Ming replied. "Then don't say such nonsense. Why would offerings still be here?" After a pause, Wu Ming said, "It's not possible." Shilian didn't know what to say. He couldn't take it anymore and snapped at Wu Ming. "That's enough. What are you trying to say? Weren't you a soldier of Shanlei? I didn't rouse you from the battlefield to listen to you speak for Yang'an. You just need to heed my command." The flower on the ground pricked his heart and stabbed his eyes. All at once, he felt very wretched and unkempt. Shilian charged forward and stomped it under his boot, crushing it like he was venting his fury. Yet after he was done, he felt baffled by his own actions. Why did he throw such a huge fit over a small flower? Shilian rushed out of the temple of the Crown Prince. Only once he felt the cool breeze did he gradually calm down. The black-clad warrior followed him outside. Here's the art of the flower handing off moment thing. Like, I mean, great, but You've investigated the area. Have you found anything that seems unusual? Shilian asked. "No," Wu Ming replied. "Are you sure?" Shilian asked. "In order to unleash the plague of human face disease, there can't be anything amiss with the time, fortune, or location." "I am certain," Wu Ming replied. Shilian had nothing more to say, so he gazed at the sky. After a moment of silence, Wu Ming asked, "Your Highness, have you decided on the method you will use to unleash the vengeful spirit's pestilence?" "I'm still thinking," Shilian said. He looked down at the black sword hanging from his waist. Millions of vengeful spirits were sealed within the sword, but it could only keep them contained for so long. Suddenly, Wu Ming said, "Your Highness, I have a presumptuous request." "I hoped that your Highness might give me the sword and allow me to summon the plague." Shilian turned his head. "Why?" Wu Ming watched Shilian intently from behind his mask. My beloved sustained terrible injuries in the war and suffered a fate worse than death. I could only watch helplessly as they suffered in torment and struggled in agony." "And?" Shilian said. "And so I hoped that I could be the one to wield the sword and avenge them." That reason was very plausible, but Shilian found it hard to trust him somehow. He narrowed his eyes. "I find you rather odd." He circled Wu Ming and commented coolly, "Based on what I've seen, you don't seem like an avenger mired in resentment and hatred. Asking this of me, is it really so you can unleash the plague?" Despite his doubts, he couldn't imagine why else Wu Ming would request to unleash it. The nameless black-clad warrior bowed his head toward him. "Your Highness, I wish for the deaths of Yang'an's people more than anyone, and I wish for them to perish by my hand. If you don't believe me, I can go prove myself to you right now." "How do you plan on doing that?" Shilian asked. Wu Ming placed his hand on his saber and began to slowly back up, withdrawing from Shilian's presence and preparing to leave. By his third step back, Shilian suddenly realized what he planned what he planned to do. To prove to Shi Lian that he had a vengeful heart, he was going to go kill someone. Stop, Shi Lian instantly called out. Wu Ming stopped. Shi Lian sized him up critically, then declared with resolve, No, I will unleash them myself. The black-clad warrior bowed his head. Thanks to his mask, it was hard to guess what expression he might be wearing, but Shi Lian didn't care about anyone's reaction, and he simply turned around. However, before that, there's something I need to do, he said softly. He raised the cold, jade-like black sword. He stared at the sharp blade in his hand, a peculiar glint flashing in his eyes. Wu Ming noticed that something was off. Your Highness, what are you planning? But Wu Ming had no choice to stop him before Shi Lian turned the point of the blade on himself and plunged the black sword into his own abdomen. This. Well, that was a scene break, but we're at the bottom of page 309. The next day, on the streets of Langar Bay, the weather had not been pleasant lately. It was perpetually cloudy and gloomy, with sudden wild gusts of wind and endless sinister rain. For that matter, Yang'an had not been peaceful lately, not one part of it. Apparently the newly built palace had caught fire, and both the king and the crown prince were reported to be ill. Ill enough that they couldn't grant anyone an audience. Everything was chaos. There were ominous signs everywhere. The people were ill at ease and couldn't help but grumble. Only ignorant children continued to play and run without a care in the world. A blast of gloomy wind swept past, harsh enough to be blinding. Suddenly, a huge explosion echoed from a bustling fork in one of the city's thoroughfares. A man had dropped from the sky. The crowd on the main street was startled by the booming noise, and they all looked toward the sound. On the ground, there was a human-shaped crater formed from the falling man's impact. Within the hole, there was a person lying listlessly flat. His hair was strewn around him, and his body was covered in blood, so much that his white robes looked utterly horrifying. Everyone on the street rushed to crowd around. Who is it? My heavens, where did he fall from? The sky? Is he dead? I don't think so. I think he's still moving. I can't believe he could survive that. Wait, what's stuck through his chest? A sword? Once the crowd was close enough, they could finally see the man's appearance clearly. Although he was disheveled, he was handsome. He had clean features and fair skin. His eyes were gazing unblinkingly toward the sky in a way that was very unlike the living. But he clearly wasn't dead since he was still breathing. The black sword that had pierced his stomach and penetrated his organs was rising up and down weakly with the movement of his chest. Another person exclaimed in surprise, Wait, isn't this that Royal Highness, the Crown Prince? Once he mentioned it, everyone else started to recognize him too. It really is. It's the old Crown Prince. It's the Crown Prince of Shanlei. I saw him once from a distance. Didn't they say the Crown Prince went missing? I heard he ascended. Why is he like this? What's with the sword? Did it really stab him all the way through? Scary. Enough gawking. Let me through. Will you let me through? I've got places to be. This street ended in a fork where the road split into two separate directions. Since the crossing was being blocked by a crowd of people, the carriages that came along couldn't get through, and drivers descended from their vehicles to check things out. It was causing quite the commotion. Suddenly, someone shouted, Wait, he seems to be saying something. The crowd quieted down. Everyone held their breaths and listened intently, trying to pick up his voice. No one on the outer edges could hear anything, so a moment later they shouted, What did he say? Did he tell you what happened? The ones in the front called back, No. Then what did he say? He said, Save me. Shi Lian lay flat on the ground. After those two words, not another sound escaped his lips. The people crowding around him reacted to the statement with varying emotions, expressions, and degrees of puzzlement. A chubby man who seemed to be a chef said, "Save him? How do we save him?" Someone took a guess. He probably meant to ask for help pulling the swords out. The chef looked fairly gutsy and was ready to go and give it a shot. However, he was held back by several hands. Don't! Absolutely do not!" The chef was confused. "Why not?" "You mustn't. Haven't you heard? Didn't Shanlei lose the war?" The bystanders explained. "Why did they lose the war? Because of human face disease. And why did that plague descend? Because there was a god of misfortune. And it was... God of misfortune? Really?" The moment those words were said, any chance of someone recklessly stepping forward was dashed. In an instant, the area around the area around that enormous human-shaped pit was entirely empty of people. After all, no one knew exactly what had happened to the crown prince of the previous dynasty. Was he a god of misfortune? Would they contract that horrifying disease if they came in contact with him? Or would they find themselves mired in bitterly bad luck? Besides, it seems like he wasn't going to die for the time being, even if they didn't pull the sword out. If he could fall from who knew where and crash so loudly from such delight without dying, then he was beyond human. A moment later, someone said timidly, "Maybe we should report this to the authorities? Didn't they say this Royal Highness ascended and became a god? What's the use in reporting this to the authorities?" "Then what should I do?" The crowd squabbled amongst themselves, but couldn't come to a decision. In the end, they set someone to report the incident and promptly wash their hands of any further responsibility. "You want to lie there? Well then, just lie there. Let's leave him be." Thus, Shilian remained sprawled in the human-shaped pit, watching the curious heads peeking in above him gradually decrease in number until they completely disappeared. The blocked carriages detoured around him, and the children playing in the streets were dragged back inside by their parents. Every so often, someone would pass by, but they kept their distance. Shilian was expressionless throughout, speaking not a single word or more. A water merchant finally couldn't bear the sight of it any longer. He whispered to his wife as she watched the stall, "Is it really all right to leave him like that? Why don't I give him a cup of water?" The water merchant's wife hesitated for a moment and scanned their surroundings, then whispered back, "Let's not. If he really is a god of misfortune, then who knows what could happen if you get too close." The water merchant was also hesitant and looked around. The other merchants were all starting at him. Sorry, I'm so that my capacity for sentences is just going in the tank. Where was I? There we go. I'm in the middle of 313. Okay. The water merchant was also hesitant and looked around. The other merchants were all staring at him from their stalls, their expressions nervous. It seemed that if he were to approach that pit, they had drawn their own lines and would stay far, far away from him in turn. In the end, he didn't dare step forward and abandoned the idea entirely. Shilian remained like that from the thin mist of morning to the blazing midday sun, then to dusk, and on until deep into the night. Many people saw him during that time, but those who approached were very few, and there certainly wasn't anyone who would help pull the black sword from his stomach. In the deep of night, there was not a soul on the streets, but Shilian still lay there on the ground and watched the skies above. The stars twinkled in the dark sky, and his thoughts were meandering and mysterious. Suddenly, clear, crisp laughter sounded from the above pit. "What are you doing?" After receiving so many visits from the owner of that voice, Shilian no longer reacted as violently as he once had. When he didn't receive his customary angry, panicked welcome, the voice's owner took the initiative and walked over himself. He stood by Shilian's head and bent down, and his voice seemed almost a little disappointed. "What are you waiting for?" That half-crying, half-smiling mask was upside down and, coincidentally, also blocked Shilian's entire field of vision. They faced each other like that, with only centimeters between them. "Get the hell out of here, you're blocking my view of the city," Shilian said coldly. White No-Face wasn't the least bit upset at being told to get the hell away. He straightened up with a laugh, and his reply sounded quite affable, like an elder tolerating a spoiled child. "What's so good about the sky?" It's prettier than you, Shilian snapped at him. Why the temper? White No Face asked. It wasn't me who stabbed you this time, and it wasn't me who left you here. You did all this yourself. Even if you haven't gotten the results you were hoping for, you still can't blame me. Shilian said nothing. You've wasted an entire day here, White No Face continued. What exactly are you trying to prove? Or are you trying to convince yourself of something? It's none of your business, Shilian said. White No Face chuckled sympathetically. Silly child. Did you think someone would help you pull out that sword? That was the end of the chapter. But let me count real quick. Because I think we may actually need to stop just a few minutes early today. Hang on. 3:48. Yeah. So, what the hell is today? Today is Wednesday. Right? Yeah. So we will be finishing this on Monday with a little bit of a shorter session since there are since there's like 34 pages left, or excuse me, more like 33. Since there's like 33 pages left, we're going to go ahead and stop now. We are on page 315 for chapter 104, which is called Man in Abyss Receives a Bamboo Hat in the Rain. I'm already fucking furious. Okay. That's chapter 104. So we will be finishing this volume on Monday. What the hell kind of ending to this volume could we possibly be in for? I don't know. But that was exhausting for about 14,000 different reasons. Right? What possible else could happen that's that bad? Which God knows you don't want to actually ask that question because MXTX will answer it for you. But like, how does Shilian get out of this mindset, really? Or like, what happens that, again, timelines. I'm very interested because we've seen Shilian at a later point in the timeline, so much so that I'm like, how? And is it in a good way or a bad way or maybe a neutral way or maybe just a complicated way? Like, who knows? Well then, here, let me remember to actually put a bookmark in there. Just like Monday, do yourself a favor and do me a favor and do a little something to take care of yourself. I saw towards the beginning of the stream, I saw that a couple of people had like curled up with some like tea and like a dog and a blanket for today's session, and that's exactly the vibe that we're going for. Go pet an animal, go for a walk, go watch something funny, go do something. Or hell, go talk about your feelings if you need to, because this could bring up some ugly stuff for some people. Yeah, and even if you don't need to stay away from certain trigger warnings, sometimes it's beneficial, even then, to be like, to tell somebody, damn, I went through this emotional stretch of story that was a motherfucker. Which is part of the benefit of having this chat and doing these things live, is that, in a way, you have these people. Go hug somebody, right? Go look at a flower. Go do something wholesome. Hell, scroll Tumblr. Or not even wholesome. Go read some like really filthy, wonderful fic. Something to spark some joy, because God knows we need it after that one. So we're back on Monday, and we're finishing this volume. I will tell you on Monday exactly what the schedule is for the next volume. I'm 99% sure we're just going straight into volume 7, but I don't know if... I'm not sure if we pick it up not next week. We finish volume 6 next week. I don't know if we then pick up volume 7 the week after, or if there's going to be another weekly break. I'd have to check my schedule. So hold on. But I will let you guys know what the next steps are for volume 7 on Monday, after I've gotten that all hammered down. Thank you so much for coming with me through all of that. As fantastic as it is, that's still something to go through. So thank you so much. We had a time. This is the epitome of having a time. And here's hoping. I'm going to play the optimist for a second. And I'm going to say that because of all that big long slog, we're going to end the volume on an up note. I'm not entirely confident in this optimism, but I'm still going to say it. So here's hoping. I will see you guys on Monday. Thank you so much for hopping in. Please go take care of yourselves, right? And have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, night, what have you. I love you all very, very much. I will see you guys next week.